Welcome to our show, Product Marketing Interviews and Everything You Need to Know About Them. I am Kenton Kavescu. I am the founder at Rocketblocks, which is an online platform that helps candidates prepare for interviews. And my guest today is Spark. She is the head of product marketing for work experiences at Oculus. So welcome to the show, Spark, and thanks for taking the time to join us.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Kenton. It's really nice to meet you.
Awesome. Likewise. And I understand that you just started this new role at Facebook. You've been at Facebook before, but this is a new team that you're joining.
Exactly. So actually, this is my last day on my current role, and I'm at Ads at Facebook, which is a multi-billion-dollar business, advertising, ad tech with mobile game marketers primarily. It's a lot of fun. I've had an incredible time, but I'm shifting into Oculus, virtual reality experiences, running a product marketing team focused on working virtual reality activity from a work perspective. Our big play is really believe the Oculus or a VR device can be the next computing device. So I'm really excited to move into this space, and hopefully I can even give you guys some interview tips as someone who just went through it as a product marketing lead too. Exactly, literally just product management, other product marketers, other stakeholder interviews for product marketing lead roles. Happy to answer some of those questions as well if things kind of get through there. And it was nerve-wracking. So I hope these tips will help you, because interviewing is a nerve-wracking experience. So hopefully it'll be helpful.
Awesome. Well, we're catching you at a good time. And I think that is a perfect transition to sort of lead into our first question. So you were just a candidate going through this process. When you were on the other side of the table as an interviewer and someone that's had a long career in product marketing, what are your favorite questions to ask a candidate applying for a product marketing position?
So I always, because we're such a cross-functional role versus just asking straight go-to-market, tell me about a go-to-market, I like to ask specific questions about what was the most contentious decision you've had to make at a go-to-market? How was it handled? And how did you align the stakeholders? And how did that launch go? Versus a general one, which most people tell me, racy models, XYZ, all of that stuff. So I like to ask pointed questions about Discord and how they handle that, because especially at larger companies, it is one of the bigger skill sets to gain. The other things I always like to ask for, because I've been very lucky to work at companies that have a lot of people who want to come and work for them, Google, Spotify, Facebook, but they might not want to work in ads. I always ask, what can this role do for your career? Like, why do you want this role? And what is your career vision long-term? So I get two things out of it. One, I understand that you actually want this role. And then two, that you have enough gumption or long-term thinking about how this role will build your CV or resume long-term.
Yeah. So you want to see someone's like arc, and then
exactly.
I don't want to put words into your mouth, but let me know if this is sort of the reason behind it. Like if someone wants to come to Facebook in some ads role, but like all they really want is just the Facebook brands and maybe have no interest in ads, or that comes out, that's like the type of thing you're looking for. Like, are they just sort of interested for the wrong reasons?
And also too, like, because product marketing is such a broad characterization, I've had people who actually want to be product managers come in, or otherwise who would better fit in broader marketing roles and want to do more of the marketing strategy. So it's also where they want to go to make sure that it's the side of product marketing for what I need for this role currently. Because we hire a variety of skill sets, but we want to make sure it's the right skill set for this right time. And also, I love coaching people. I always like to turn the conversation a little bit into seeing what it'd be like to coach this as their lead or as a peer. So I always like to hear where to go to see if I can suss out connection points and see how they'll take positive or negative reinforcement. The third is, go ahead.
I was going to say the last point you just mentioned there is interesting and resonated, how they would take positive or negative reinforcement. One of the other PMM leaders we were speaking to for this show was talking about, I try and really suss out coachability, because I don't want to bring someone on that will never take a point of feedback or thinks they already know everything, because almost certainly they don't. So
none of us do.
Yeah, exactly.
None of us do. And it's all sometimes our jobs, which is why I love product marketing, to ask the questions so that other people don't. Like sometimes it is our job to be that person in the room to understand the strategy, the tech, to communicate it to a broader audience. So I agree with that person's thoughts 1,000%. The third one is probably about trade-off position. Like, what is the hardest trade-off decision you've had to make?
Interesting.
Generally, people answer this from a personal point of view. I've gotten a lot of job background. like, it was hard for me to choose between this job and that other job. The one person I know who really nailed it talked a lot about making really tough layoff decisions, and how he answered it as well was taking care of the people in the process. That was really tough. So I learned a lot about, it was actually a bigger business trade-off. And I was looking for someone more senior, someone who would manage people at the time. So someone who automatically went to a non-personal trade really resonated well with me.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense. 3 good questions. I like it. Awesome. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, as you run interviews, and I'm sure you've done probably hundreds over the course of your career, what are some of the common mistakes you see product marketing candidates make in interviews? Like, if you could sit someone down that's about to go through this process and say, hey, make sure you avoid doing these common things, what would those be?
So the biggest is gaps research. The 3 areas that should be researched are the industry or the market that this is in, if there's some sort of specialty, obviously, the role, right? Like, what is this role? Is it ads? What is the role? I've had people, again, come in as product managers, different, because these things are so broad.
So not really only like what areas it aligned against, but do they really understand what product marketing in the context of Facebook or this team means? Because there's a lot of differences, right? Company to company.
Exactly. And sometimes it's hard to do that much research on the role from HR alone, but just having a better understanding of the role and being prepped with questions to ask about the role in a better way.
Yeah.
The third is the interviewer. And I'm actually shocked at how few people actually do their proper Facebook, LinkedIn stalking of the interviewer. In terms of me. And I've noticed too, and I did this extensively in my interviews for Oculus, because I especially was switching industry areas where I have never worked in VR before. And I've worked in ads, and I was moving into work productivity. So I couldn't just wow them with my industry expertise. I had to make interpersonal connections and build trust very quickly from a perspective with the interviewer.
Yep.
So I read everything about what this person has done, everything they published, watched things like this that the person might have published.
Yeah.
And I'm always surprised at how people actually, and because at the end of the day, it's a person that you're trying to make.
Yeah.
So if you can, generally you're going to land some sort of resonating topic within that. And if someone doesn't read those 3 areas, I can tell based on the questions they ask or even how they respond to the questions. And it generally is a non-starter across those 3 areas.
Yeah. So basically, like, know the industry area, know and research the role, or if it's hard to research the role for whatever reason, at least come ready with your questions so you can ask the person on the other side of the table, and then know the person as well, or do the research you can. And I think,
exactly,
on the latter part, most times today, I feel like before you get to sort of the super day or the on-site round, whatever you want to call it, usually the recruiter will say, like, here's the list of people you're interviewing with.
Exactly.
Sometimes I guess you don't get that, and then, you couldn't be expected to know.
Exactly.
But
Exactly. But I think, and it's definitely different culturally. Batch interviews, there's a lot of things going on. But if you can, especially, and the more executive level you get, the more that this will be very well defined. And they're not just looking for an industry or a product marketing. They're looking for a person that they rely on to drive this product forward. So not taking the time to think of personal connection with who you're going to work with in a good way is, you wouldn't be yourself the biggest favor in prepping, I think.
Yeah, I agree with all those points. And it echoes some of the other conversations I've had with some of your peers about this type of stuff as well. And the other thing that it's sort of, to me, like when I think about the 3 specific points you made, the meta sort of link between them feels like it's really about like doing your research beforehand, like showing, like you are basically saying, I'm showing up to the interview and I've put in a lot of effort already. Like I'm indicating some real interest because I spend time researching you. I spend time really like researching the industry and like the role and all these things. So it's like just indicating interest through your action.
1,000%.
Cool. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned sort of the go-to-market question you like asking and some of the other favorite questions. Tell me a little bit, and you sort of already hinted at some of this, but tell me about when you think about a round of product marketing interviews. Let's say like maybe you're running for your team, you're bringing candidates through this gauntlet, for lack of a better word. What are the key skills you're really trying to suss out? What do you want to see that he or she can bring to the table? So you ask a bunch of questions, but underneath that, what are the atomic skills you're really looking for?
So we structure our interviews so that, and I think Google does the same that companies do, where each interviewer kind of has a subject matter that they want to cover, right? And that it's about, certain topics that you want to drive. So what the 4 areas that I generally have are selling with data. Data-driven storytelling, vetting out how they get data, how they collect data. I usually bring in someone from more of a side to run that presentation, or someone who's really good on my team who's already very good with data and how they can suss out the right stories to tell. Industry knowledge will be one of the other interviews. Asking the right questions, thinking about it. If they're not from the industry, usually about if they can industry, or try to vet out how much research they've done on the industry to see, even though they're not from it.
Are they on a good trajectory?
How much have you done? Working is its own interview set, like stakeholder management, how you work with others and how you influence people. And the 4th is basically a little change of that, is not just thinking about teamwork, but how can you influence others? So this will probably be with more of a senior stakeholder, and it'll be more like, how have you influenced someone more senior? How have you thought through these things? Whereas working with others is teamwork. It's like, how do you work on teams, and that stuff. We always have a case study. So expect a case study, especially for PMM interviews. I think about it in 2 ways. The case study it shows that they've done their research. It can show work output. But what I really push in the case study, because they're lucky with the candidate pool that we get, I look for how they answer Q&A. How they handle the Q&A and the feedback case. Because if you want to see if someone gets defensive in a high pressure situation, start challenging them in a study interview, right? And then for me, or defense, be open. That's what it's for. We're not here to tear you down. We're here to judge your openness and support and things like that. And 2, another red flag is when it says something that is not quite right. Instead of saying, I actually don't know, I should get you, or all of that, it's instead go with more of a hypothesis of how it would work versus what it would when they're in a room of experts. And for me, that's always a red flag too, because often as product marketers, we're in a room with experts, and our job, it's better for us to be accurate than us to be wrong. And for us to look like we don't have the answers right now than for us to put the wrong information out in the ether, especially in B2B and in a complicated process. So I look for those 2 things in the case beyond the subject matter.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, at the end of the day, I think people get into these modes about, case interviews are like X or Y. It's a simulation of basically a business conversation. The goal is to sort of replicate something that might happen on the job and see how you react. And so all those things you were just mentioning make complete sense, right? Because on the job, no one's going to expect that you walk in and say, give a presentation, and then no one asks questions or challenges. People are going to have questions, and they're going to want to engage on those and things like that. I did want to ask a few follow-ups on that. So that those 4 buckets made a lot of sense. So do you run interviews where you'll have a one-on-one conversation sort of, and they'll be assessing you on industry knowledge and your ability to influence others, and then separately you'll do sort of a case conversation? And is it a homework thing that you usually do, or is it a on the fly, hey, if you had problem X?
So there's generally 3 different rounds that I put people through.
Okay.
Doing messy things with the camera. 3 different rounds. So first round, hiring screen with the recruiter, but with me. And I'm doing very general, all of those 4 areas, very high level.
Okay.
Could this person make it through loops, potentially through the interview screens? Then the second is when they have 4 separate conversations around each of these separate subject matters, where the focus of the conversation is that. They'll also talk about affability. There'll be other questions the interviewers will ask based upon their expertise but they'll really push those.
But they'll make sure they get an answer and this person has the right
exactly. And if
can work with data.
Exactly. And then what I've seen, people can actually interview fantastically, but then we get to the case and the case is whoa, the case can be a hot mess, or the case is great. They interview fantastically. They get very defensive, inaccurate statements during the Q&A. But that's all of those 3 things. You are on my team. Great, welcome. That's amazing. It's hard. And I've gotten pushback a lot about the rigor that we go through on our team, because not all people do cases. Not all people have this level of, even at Facebook, not everybody has to do a case. But I really think it's a remote world where you can't meet people in person and suss out some of these things. Seeing a real world example of how someone would act in a pressure situation is a gift that you get prior to this. And since we're lucky to kind of be able to do that, I'm probably going to keep this as a standard for every hire I make, no matter what. And anytime I've taken on a without some of that vetting, I've honestly regretted it.
Yeah, there's a few interesting things you mentioned there. So as one, I didn't realize this, but it sounds like you have some leeway to craft your marketing interviews the way you like. It's not all PMMs at Facebook aren't told you must run someone through a case, but you opt to, obviously. I completely agree about it's a good extra vetting step in the process. I think the other thing that is useful about it, I often tell candidates when I'm talking to them is like, remember that this is a window for you into the type of work that you will actually do on this team. And if you sit down to do this case and think about it and you are miserable and you don't like thinking about this topic and you don't like thinking about these questions, well, like that's a pretty good, like you should use that as an indicator that maybe even if you get the job, this isn't going to be the right fit. So it's like, I think it helps both sides hopefully arrive at better fit decisions, which then everyone's happier within the long term.
Agreed.
And then the last sort of follow-up question I had for you there is, you don't need to share like the specific questions you use, but when you think about a product marketing case, like what is like the type of questions that you like to propose in like one of these cases? Is it like a go-to-market thing, or like how do you?
So I find go-to-market, it's a business case to influence a roadmap conversation. Go-to-market, I think, well, so especially in B2B, it's really about being to market and a lot of like building the right product solutions, the right sets. Like we at Facebook just spent 3 years working on this amazing marketing product on the Facebook ad side that took us a really long time to launch, but it's doing really well because in a B2B sense, you have to drive what's best to market. We drive cases that are how a sliver of a vertical area industry, what are the trends, competition, basically do an analysis, whether it's a SWOT analysis or just an analysis of the industry, and what would you recommend to the product team that we should be focusing on from a build perspective. A couple of other cases I've seen have been more broad, have been more like, how should Netflix enter the ads market, or something like a hypothetical
like
business and how they would do it, like a market entry or things like that, which I also agree with. And I think that'd be an interesting case study, but because so much of work, especially on B2B, it's influencing a roadmap so that we have the best products to market. That's where I've generally put most of my case studies.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. I think the key part of many product marketing roles in my experience is that you are trying to understand the customer base and influence product and engineering to make sure they're building and sort of going the right direction. So I feel like that's a huge part of the job. And it's fun to hear you say that you do some cases based off that, because we have a lot in our product marketing module in Rocketbox. There's a lot of stuff. It's like, hey, like if you got this set of data from a customer survey and then the PM tells you that they're only going to build features X, Y, and Z, like how do you make the case that maybe something's being missed?
One classic PMM problem. And honestly, our VP of gaming sales, Rick Kelly, who's one of my favorite people do this all the time, his best salesperson is the product, right? Like if you have a good product, everything is easier.
Totally.
Everything is the marketing of everything is easier. So I always think our biggest responsibility is to try and get it to be the best product possible, so that marketing of it will be very easy and selling of it and adoption of it and all of that stuff will be very easy.
Then you're not fighting the lipstick on a pig scenario.
Exactly. We all hate those situations. And the best way to do that is to get a funnel, influence while they're building things. It's like buying a house, you stage a design house, right? To be fantastic in certain ways, especially with such fickle audiences and such a competitive environment that we live in today. So it's all for the good of you, to your point, of whether it's a good role fit or not.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. And I want to talk a little bit about if you are an aspiring product marketing manager, you've never been in that role before, you want to break in for the first time. Aside from the things we've talked about already, and you've mentioned like the 4 buckets that you're going to be testing people on and how to think about performing if you get a marketing case, are there other tips you'd have specifically for someone looking to break in for the first time?
What I would, and this is general interview advice as well, is especially if you don't have the product marketing experience, do research on the role to understand what the responsibilities are. But what I like to do for any interview is look at who I'm getting interviewed by and understand their background, where they're coming, how they might work with a product marketer, create a headline for them, just like a value proposition of me, a value prop of me for that interviewer. Especially if I'm lucky enough to get what the topic is. And then by the end of the interview, want them to believe in that headline and have anecdotes and things lined up to support that headline, and practice those anecdotes in a very concise manner so that that person can walk away knowing that I have that skill or that headline. And each person should have a headline. that, pull from any website, strong XFN alignment, strong industry experience, managing others, project management. There's headlines that you can speak about yourself that matter right up into a skills for a product marketer. Try to get that in because you get them all in one person, because then you're going to be all over the place. But if you can focus, just like a go-to-market message, what's my value prop most to this audience, and how can I show them that I can do this? And when they all get there, you have all of those components together. When they do the interview debrief, you're in a good spot. You're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like the framing of it. I mean, it's very reminiscent of like a sales pitch, right? It's like, here's the takeaway I want them to have. Here's the supporting points I'm going to really hammer home so that there's going to be no way this person walks out of that meeting without getting that takeaway. And I like your sort of meta point about you structure it so it's takeaway A for this person, takeaway B for this person, takeaway C for this person, because everyone knows at the end of the interview, those people are all going to sit together and discuss. And if they like have 3 or 4 points that like make you look like the ideal product marketer, then that's what you want.
Yeah, I really got this good advice from a mentor of mine, John Stein. He's amazing. He's head of marketing at DeepMind, such a fantastic mentor and marketer. He said, make sure that you have different stories or different headlines for each of these people, because again, they discuss. And if you do have main examples for all of them, they're going to be like, oh, the same thing with all of us. Like, what else did he or she do? Is this the only thing that's impressive about them? And that's doing yourself a disservice. You basically have messaging points to land with these 4 people. So take advantage of it,
Yep, totally. And like maybe a little overlap is even good or like desirable, but like, yeah, if you've told the same story 4 times, it's probably going to look a little thin, right? Like,
and you could also, what I did, because some of my bigger stories, like major launches, I wanted to tell in a couple different ways, but the headline for that launch for another person was a little different.
Right.
For a headline for one of them was more about my XFN alignment, my alignment prowess and unbundling difficult situations. My other anecdote for another person who was on the data science analyst side was how we really structured our hypotheses and our auction dynamics to really take that to the next level. So it was nice to have almost a framework again of which anecdotes to bring in and be very concise about that. So that also, because at the end of the day, you have minutes with these people it's a lot of time, but it's what's going to resonate with them is something that you need to research because they're your target audience. If you can't do that from an interview perspective, it's very hard for them to believe that you can do it with their products on a massive scale.
Yeah. And I really like your point about I might have story A, and in an interview where I'm focusing on the data angle, I reframe it and sort of rotate it to focus on that angle. And I probably leave out some other details, but it may also be a really great story when someone asks me about some sort of workplace collaboration because there was a big debate or thing that got resolved and I played a pivotal role in that. And so you rotate the other way and the others. Yeah, makes total sense.
It's good to have multiple ones if you can refactor it. The other thing I would say is that especially early in your career, it's more expected that you might be a bit more repetitive. So don't go over the top with my advice, especially if you haven't worked very long in the process and it's more understandable. But someone like me, a long time in product marketing, I should have different things across my multiple career path across these 3 different tech companies, or what was I doing? So it also is, think about it in line with your level and what should be experience level. And if you're gunning for something higher, bring in as many examples as you can so that you can show that you have a proven track record in multiple situations to get stuff done.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Cool. Okay, I've got one final question for you. And you've already thrown out a bunch of things that I think would help you meet this, but to the extent you've got any last tips, like if you are going into one of these interviews, you really want to make sure that you stand out, that you set yourself apart. Because as you know, especially working in a place like Facebook and Spotify in the past, like these are incredibly desirable companies. Lots of people, you open up a role for product marketing, a ton of people are going to apply. Like, how do you set yourself apart against a bunch of other pretty good candidates that are probably also working hard to land this role?
Yeah, I think this goes again to the research about the interviewer and really trying to find ways to resonate with that person. What's going to resonate with different people could be different things, unfortunately. What resonates with me is honesty and coachability and really good questions, like curious, thoughtful questions show that even though they don't know everything about it. They have an innate curiosity to go a little bit further and really figure out how this stuff works. I've had a couple of candidates come through on paper, answer everything well, but the questions were just so surface level that they didn't really try to figure out how this solution actually worked. And that's fine. In a lot of marketing, you don't really need that. Product marketing, especially for sophisticated products. And again, it depends on what you need from a product perspective. Really understanding how it works to the sales enablement and a lot more of the sophistication that you'll need, as well as the clout that you'll have in the room. Like if you don't understand how this works, you're never going to get the clout or the respect to influence a roadmap. Yeah. So that's a deal breaker for me. But again, it could be different for other people.
Yeah, I like that. That makes sense. Though, but like going deep into like probing on how the product works and the mechanics of it and showing that you've got some real interest there, because it is, like influencing product and engineering, as you mentioned, is such a key part, because you want to get the product right, then the rest of the job's easier.
The best interviews turn into conversations about the areas. And one of the best training of it, which sometimes I still laugh about it. So I was in a sorority at Northwestern, and that was probably the best interview I've ever had in my life. You have 5 minutes to make an impression on someone and get to a conversation and get out of small talk. It's very hard to do. It takes practice with people in bars, practice with people. I also had a journalism background, which also with me that as well. But things like this sometimes take practice from an interview and conversational perspective, but they'll only be helpful in these sorts of situations.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's a nice point to end on. But the interview is sort of like a weird microcosm. Like it's trying to sort of in some ways emulate the job, but like because it's so compressed, like you really need to figure out like how to get the point across quickly, how to be structured about it, and to demonstrate, in your case, all the particular skills that matter for product marketing. So Spark, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course. It was really nice meeting you, and best of luck on your move back to the Bay.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
This podcast is produced by ShareBird, the peer mentoring platform for product marketers. It is the place to discover on-demand resources to help you with your product marketing. To view past episodes, go to sharebird.com. And if you're preparing for product marketing interviews, check out Rocketblock's product marketing interview prep tools, the best place to practice PMM interview skills and get live coaching to ace your PMM interviews. Visit us at rocketblocks.me.